On September 26, 1983, a Soviet officer stared at a screen that told him 5 American nuclear missiles were streaking toward his country. His hand hovered over the phone that would trigger World War III. He had minutes to decide whether 300 million people would live or die. What would you do if the fate of civilization rested on your doubt? Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov was the duty officer at Sepukov 15, a secret Soviet bunker south of Moscow that monitored early warning satellites. The year 1983 was the most dangerous moment of the Cold War since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Just 3 weeks earlier, Soviet fighters had shot down Korean Airlines Flight 007, killing 269 people, including a US congressman. NATO was preparing for Able Archer 83, a massive nuclear war game that Soviet intelligence feared might be cover for a real first strike. In this atmosphere of mutual terror and mistrust, the Soviet Union had invested billions in a satellite system called OKO, meaning eye. OKO's job was simple and terrifying: detect American missile launches early enough for the Soviet Union to launch its own missiles before the incoming warheads destroyed them. The doctrine was called launch on warning. Both superpowers lived by it. Both superpowers could die by it. Petrov settled into his chair for the midnight shift at the command center. Around him sat a dozen officers monitoring banks of screens and teleprinter machines. The bunker was buried deep underground, protected by meters of concrete and steel. Outside, autumn rain fell on the birch forests. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed over maps of the United States marked with Soviet missile targets. The screens showed green. That meant peace. That meant the satellites orbiting high above the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans detected nothing unusual. Petrov later recalled that the atmosphere was routine, almost boring. Then the system shrieked. A single word flashed on the screen in red letters: launch. One of the satellites had detected the infrared signature of a missile rising from a US base. Protocol demanded Petrov immediately notify his superiors at Soviet Military Command. From there, the alert would climb to General Secretary Yuri Andropov, who had perhaps 10 minutes to order a full retaliatory strike before American warheads turned Soviet cities into ash. Petrov's stomach dropped. He checked the confidence level of the detection. The system reported the alert as highest reliability, but something felt wrong. The United States had thousands of intercontinental ballistic missiles. Why would they launch just one? A first strike would come in the hundreds, designed to overwhelm Soviet defenses. One missile made no strategic sense. Petrov picked up the phone to call his commander, then hesitated. He ordered his staff to check ground-based radar stations, which could provide secondary confirmation. But the radar systems would need several minutes to detect missiles rising over the horizon. If Petrov waited for confirmation, he might wait too long. If he called it in immediately and was wrong, he would trigger chaos in the Soviet chain of command. If he called it in and was right, his hesitation might have already doomed his country. Then the screen shrieked again. Launch. A second missile detected. Then a third. Then a fourth. 5 missiles total, all rising from US bases, all heading towards Soviet territory. The system's confidence remained at maximum. The other officers in the bunker stared at Petrov, waiting for him to lift the phone and speak the words that would end the world as they knew it. Petrov later told interviewers that his training evaporated in that moment. He thought about his children. He thought about the new satellite system, rushed into service despite technical problems. He thought about the single most important fact: ground-based radar still showed nothing. The satellites were sophisticated, but they were new and they were fallible. The radar installations were old, but they were proven. He made his decision. He called his superiors and reported a system malfunction, not an attack. He told them the satellite detections were a false alarm. He had no proof. He simply believed the machines were lying. For 23 agonizing minutes, Petrov and his staff waited as the missiles supposedly flew closer. If he was wrong, Soviet radar would suddenly light up with incoming warheads. If he was wrong, in minutes he would hear the phone ring with screaming commanders demanding to know why he had not reported an attack in time. The radar screens stayed clear. No missiles appeared over the horizon. At 12:38 a.m., Soviet ground stations confirmed no American launch. Petrov had been right. The satellites had seen ghosts. Within hours, engineers determined what had happened. The Oko satellites used infrared sensors to detect the heat of rocket exhaust. On that particular night, sunlight had reflected off high-altitude clouds over the United States at a precise angle, creating a heat signature that the system's algorithms interpreted as missile launches. The satellites had mistaken the sun for a nuclear first strike. Petrov wrote a detailed report about the incident and the system's flaws. But instead of being celebrated, he was quietly reprimanded for incomplete paperwork during the crisis. Soviet authorities wanted the embarrassing malfunction buried. The incident remained classified for years. Petrov continued working at Oko for a time, then took early retirement. His role in preventing nuclear war stayed secret for over a decade. The story of Stanislav Petrov first emerged publicly in 1998 when Russian military journalist Yuri Votintsev tracked him down and published his account. Western media picked up the story shortly after. Petrov gave several interviews to Russian and international outlets over the following years, consistently describing the same sequence of events. In 2004, the Association of World Citizens gave Petrov a World Citizen Award in a ceremony at the United Nations. Documentary filmmaker Peter Antony produced The Man Who Saved the World in 2014, featuring extensive interviews with Petrov and former Soviet officials. These officials confirmed the existence of the Sepukov 15 bunker and the September 1983 incident, though many details remained disputed or unclear due to the classified nature of Soviet military systems. In 2006, Petrov traveled to the United States and met with former U.S. Senator Sam Nunn and other figures from the nuclear arms reduction movement. Nunn stated publicly that Petrov's actions represented a reminder of the dangers of nuclear weapons. Russian military officials later acknowledged the incident in general terms without releasing complete records. Historians and nuclear policy experts have examined the incident through declassified Soviet documents, Petrov's testimony, and corroborating accounts from other officers who worked at early warning facilities during the Cold War. The core facts are not seriously disputed. The Oko system malfunctioned, Petrov reported a false alarm instead of a missile attack, and his judgment prevented the alert from escalating to Soviet leadership. What remains harder to verify is the precise proximity to nuclear war. Some historians argue that even if Petrov had reported an attack, Soviet leadership would have waited for radar confirmation before launching a counterstrike. Others point out that the doctrine of launch on warning existed precisely because leaders might not have time for such verification. In the heat of crisis, with minutes to decide, standard procedures could have unraveled. Not everyone agrees on how close the world actually came to nuclear war that night. Some former Soviet officers have suggested that additional safeguards existed in the chain of command, and that a false satellite reading alone would not have triggered a launch. They argue that ground radar confirmation was always required before notifying top leadership of an attack. Other researchers counter that the entire purpose of launch on warning was to respond faster than ground radar could provide certainty. If Soviet doctrine truly required radar confirmation before alerting leadership, then the satellite system would have been largely pointless. The tension between these interpretations reflects the fog that still hangs over Cold War nuclear procedures, much of which remains classified even decades later. There are also gaps in what we know about the specific technology failure. While Soviet engineers attributed the false alarms to sunlight reflecting off clouds, the complete technical investigation was never made public. Some details may remain classified. Others may have been lost when the Soviet Union collapsed and military records scattered across newly independent states. A few critics have questioned whether Petrov's role has been overstated in popular retellings. They note that he was following reasonable judgment in doubting a small-scale attack, and that his decision not to immediately escalate was prudent rather than heroic. This view doesn't deny the incident happened, but rather questions the narrative that one man single-handedly prevented nuclear war. The truth likely lies between the extremes. Petrov made a crucial decision under enormous pressure, and we cannot know with certainty what would have followed if he had chosen differently. Stanislav Petrov lived the rest of his life knowing he had made a choice that could have killed him and everyone he loved, or saved them. In interviews, he described suffering from post-traumatic stress after the incident. The weight of those minutes never left him. He struggled with depression and often wondered if he should have followed protocol more closely, even though breaking protocol had likely saved millions of lives. Petrov received little recognition in Russia during his lifetime. The Soviet military never officially acknowledged his role or thanked him. He lived modestly on a pension in a small town, occasionally meeting with journalists or peace activists who had heard his story. When documentary crews visited him in his later years, he appeared uncomfortable with being called a hero. He insisted he had simply done his job and made a reasonable judgment call. For the hundreds of millions of people who never knew how close they came to annihilation on September 26, 1983, life continued normally. Children went to school the next day. People went to work. The sun rose over Moscow and Washington and every city in between. They lived because a tired officer in a bunker decided to doubt a machine. They lived because of a technical glitch that made sunlight look like Armageddon. They lived, and most of them will never know they almost didn't. The Petrov incident exposes the fundamental paradox of nuclear deterrence. It only works if both sides believe the other will actually launch. But if both sides truly believe that, the system is one error away from suicide. Think of two people pointing loaded guns at each other's heads in a dark room. Their safety depends on both people being rational, calm, and having working trigger fingers. But it also depends on neither person flinching at a shadow. Cold War nuclear strategy created what experts call strategic stability. Neither side could win a nuclear war, so neither side would start one. But maintaining that stability required early warning systems that operated on hair-trigger alert. The faster and more automated those systems became, the less time humans had to verify what the sensors reported. In the rush to avoid being destroyed by a surprise attack, both superpowers built systems that could accidentally trigger the very war they were designed to prevent. Nuclear historian Alex Wellerstein has pointed out that the Petrov incident was not the only close call during the Cold War. In 1960, American early warning radar detected a massive Soviet missile attack that turned out to be the moon rising over Norway. In 1979, a training tape accidentally fed false attack data into NORAD computers. In 1995, a Norwegian research rocket caused Russian radar to briefly activate President Boris Yeltsin's nuclear briefcase. Each incident had its own Petrov, someone who doubted the alert, delayed the escalation, or demanded verification before catastrophe could unfold. But the fact that we needed so many Petrovs reveals a system built on a foundation of barely controlled chaos. Today, the United States and Russia maintain thousands of nuclear weapons on high alert. China is expanding its nuclear arsenal. New technologies like hypersonic missiles and artificial intelligence are being integrated into nuclear command systems. The automation that caused the 1983 false alarm is now far more sophisticated. Whether that makes us safer or brings us closer to the next moment when someone must choose between trusting a machine and trusting their doubt remains an open question. Here is what we know. On a cold night in September 1983, Soviet satellites falsely reported an American missile launch. Stanislav Petrov judged the report unreliable and did not immediately alert Soviet leadership. His decision prevented the incident from escalating while ground radar proved no attack was occurring. Here is what we don't know: exactly how close the Soviet Union came to launching a retaliatory strike, or whether additional safeguards would have stopped escalation even if Petrov had reported an attack. What we can say with confidence is that nuclear weapons remain, and the systems controlling them are no less fallible than they were 40 years ago. The question is not whether another false alarm will happen. The question is whether the next person facing that decision will have Petrov's clarity under pressure. The Petrov incident influenced decades of nuclear policy discussions, though not as much as it should have. Arms control advocates point to it as evidence that nuclear arsenals should be taken off high alert status, giving leaders more time to verify warnings before making launch decisions. But both the United States and Russia continue to maintain forces that can be launched within minutes. The general structure of nuclear early warning systems has not fundamentally changed since 1983. Both countries still rely on satellite detection and ground radar, though the technology has improved. The time pressures that Petrov faced remain essentially the same. Some experts believe that artificial intelligence could be integrated into early warning systems to reduce false alarms. while others warn that AI could make the systems more opaque and harder for humans to override. How militaries balance automation with human judgment in nuclear command systems over the next decade is difficult to predict. The rise of new nuclear-armed states and the erosion of Cold War arms control treaties may increase the risk of miscalculation. As more countries possess nuclear weapons, the chances of an accident, false alarm, or miscommunication involving nuclear forces could grow. Stanislav Petrov died in 2017 at age 77. His obituary appeared in major newspapers worldwide, finally giving him recognition that his own country never provided during most of his life. The bunker at Sepukov, 15, is reportedly no longer operational, but similar facilities continue to scan the skies for the flash of rocket exhaust against the darkness of space. The story of Stanislav Petrov is not a story about heroism. It is a story about the impossible burden we place on ordinary people when we build weapons that can end the world. It is a story about doubt, about the courage to question authority and machines when everything screams at you to obey. It is a reminder that we are all still here because of luck, judgment, and the grace of strangers we will never meet. If you want to understand more about how close we have come to nuclear war, watch our next video, The Day America Lost a Nuclear Bomb and Never Found It. It explores another Cold War incident where systems failed and ordinary people made choices that determined whether disaster unfolded or was barely avoided.